Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're zooming in on a really significant shift happening in Asian biotech. For decades, if you talked about pharma innovation in Asia, Japan was pretty much the only game in town. Really known for taking drugs from the lab right through to market.
That picture looks totally different now. I mean, our sources are showing this, explosive growth in South Korea's drug discovery scene. They've made a really aggressive move beyond just generics. And they've put this national strategy in place that's frankly so effective, it's really challenging Japan's longstanding position.
Right. So our goal today is to kind of unpack how they did that. What are the specific mechanisms? We want to look at the government strategies, especially the money side, but also, the other stuff. Talent, speed, that national vision they seem to have. And this matters globally too, right? Because China's growth is changing the game, and South Korea seems to have really strategically carved out a niche as an innovation hub.
Exactly. And a lot of this success really come down to very deliberate, centralized planning. And the key example of that is the KDDF. That's the Korea Drug Development Fund.
Okay, KDDF. Let's dig into that. It started in 2011, you said. But how is it fundamentally different from just, say, giving out standard research grants?
Well, I think the core difference is integration. It wasn't just another fund. It was launched as a national project. And it operates as this strategic consortium. It actually links three really powerful ministries: health and welfare, science and ICT, and industry, trade, and energy.
Three ministries working together. Usually they operate in their own silos, right?
Precisely. Most funding bodies stick to one sector. The KDDF basically forces them to cooperate across that whole innovation chain from start to finish.
Okay, that sounds like a way to cut through some red tape, maybe.
Right.
But how did they make sure it wasn't just, three bureaucracies bumping into each other? What was the specific mandate?
The mandate was full cycle support with really clear milestones built in. So KDDF funds the entire journey, starting with the basic science, guiding it through clinical trials, and even helping get it listed on the market. And the scale shows they were serious. Between 2011 and 2020, they put in 1.6 trillion Korean won. That's roughly 1.2 billion US dollars?
Wow.
And there are plans for another 1.6 billion US dollars by 2030.
That's a serious amount of cash. Okay, so how does that funding strategy compare to what Japan's doing?
Well, Japan does have an equivalent system for advanced drug discovery.
Okay.
And on paper, the total funding actually looks bigger, something like 350 billion Japanese yen, maybe $2.3 billion USD.
Yeah.
And this is the crucial point. It's about how the money is deployed.
Oh.
And Japan's system mostly relies on outside venture capital funds to distribute the money. And our sources suggest, critics say this leads to kind of vague objectives, a bit scattershot maybe.
Okay.
KDDF, on the other hand, uses really clear strategic allocation. It's tied directly to those cross-ministry goals.
Yeah.
So the money hits specific targets at specific times.
Okay, so it's not just the pile of money, it's the system directing it, like having a GPS for the investment. And with that strategic direction, what kind of results are we seeing? What has KDDF actually delivered?
Well, the results really seem to back up the model. KDDF has supported, I think, over 162 projects. And it's helped broker more than 34 licensed deals. Big ones totaling around 4.7 billion US dollars.
4.7 billion, that's significant.
It is. And importantly, this wasn't just domestic deals. Nearly 40% of those deals were signed with overseas pharma companies. That signals real global recognition.
So beyond the big grants, you mentioned something else. Our sources suggest the real genius might be in tackling those smaller friction points that often kill startups. Can you give an example, like a hidden cost KDDF helps with?
Absolutely. The cost of doing advanced science is often the biggest hurdle.
Yeah.
Right. KDDF provides free access to really essential high-cost testing, specifically pharmacology testing. That's the stage where you test your potential drug candidate, for efficacy and safety in disease models, usually involving animal testing.
Right, and that's not just expensive. It needs to be done properly, statistically speaking, if you want big pharma companies to even look at the results.
Exactly right. Take immunodeficient mice. They're critical for a lot of this research. Each mouse can cost over $1,300 USD, maybe more.
That's on mouse.
Yeah. And to get data that's actually statistically solid, usable data, you can't just test one or two. You need groups, maybe 30 or 40 animals. So suddenly, one single critical pharmacology trial, that could cost you anywhere from, say, $35,000 to $70,000 USD.
Wow. Okay.
If a startup or even an academic lab can't afford that kind of robust testing, their data just isn't valuable for commercialization. It's basically unaccessible.
And this brings us to that gap you mentioned in Japanese academia, doesn't it?
It really does. Because of budget constraints in Japan, academic researchers often end up using, well, insufficient numbers of animals. Or they might skip some complex tests entirely.
Which means the data isn't strong enough.
Exactly. It lacks statistical power. So serious pharmaceutical companies looking for things to license or invest in, they just can't use it. KDDF effectively removes that huge practical financial hurdle. It makes sure the research coming out is commercially relevant right from the start.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit, away from the funding and the labs towards the human element, the business culture in South Korea. It seems like they have this necessary global mindset.
That's definitely the next key piece of the puzzle, speed and professionalism. South Korean bioventures seem to have remarkably high English proficiency overall,
Yeah.
which you absolutely need for international deals.
It's non-negotiable, really.
Totally. And they make decisions extremely quickly. Our sources mentioned examples where startup execs were ready to sign contracts with a CRO, a contract research organization that runs trials.
Yeah.
Like right after the first presentation,
Mhm.
immediately. That kind of speed just shaves months, maybe years, off development timelines.
And this drive, this momentum, it doesn't just happen organically, does it? It feels like it's pushed from the top.
It is. It's a national imperative. South Korea made it an explicit top-down goal. Back in 2025, the government announced this vision. K-Biopharmaceuticals, top 5 global powerhouse.
Catchy name.
Yeah. And crucially, they attached hard numbers to it, specific goals for 2030. Things like doubling their biopharma exports, launching 3 blockbuster new drugs, and getting to 3rd place globally in clinical trial volume.
Okay, those are very clear, measurable, time-bound goals. That forces accountability, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And this focus on global competence, it also shows up in manufacturing, right? Especially in the CDMO sector, contract development and manufacturing organizations.
Yes, absolutely. South Korea's success there with companies like Samsung Biologics isn't just because they have fancy equipment, although they do. It's really powered by aggressive sales teams and, again, excellent English skills.
Yeah.
They need that to win global manufacturing projects.
And how does that compare to Japan in the CDMO space?
We see a really sharp contrast in Japan. Government support for Japanese CDMOs often ends up funding the purchase of overseas CDMOs.
Wait, they use the money to buy foreign companies? Why?
Because the domestic Japanese companies often struggle to win major international contracts themselves. They lack the necessary overseas sales strength, the global reach. So the investment gets made, but the capital just flows straight out of the country because the talent needed to actually capture that global market isn't quite there.
Okay, so if South Korea is benefiting from this holistic strategy, speed, clear goals, global skills, where are the weak spots appearing in Japan's system, especially around talent?
The big one seems to be a shortage of very specialized talent, particularly in those roles that bridge science and business.
Like sales and business development.
Exactly. Roles needing deep scientific understanding plus high-level English proficiency. And the global standard for these roles has gone up. International CROs, for instance, now often require PhDs even for senior sales positions.
Right, so you need someone who's basically a scientist but can also communicate complex stuff internationally and, close a deal.
Precisely. And because there seems to be a real lack of Japanese professionals who fit that bill, what you see happening is foreign firms operating in Japan. They're increasingly hiring candidates from South Korea or China or India, people who are fluent in both Japanese and English and have those advanced science degrees.
That really highlights the gap, doesn't it? The system isn't producing the people needed for today's global biotech industry.
It seems that way, yes.
And this failure, it kind of loops back to who's designing these government support programs in the first place.
Yes, this looks like a systemic issue, maybe institutional inertia.
Mm-hmm.
Our sources point out that Japanese support systems are often designed by people without practical, real-world experience in the field.
You mean academics or government officials?
Typically, yeah. Academics or career bureaucrats. They create systems that might look good structurally,
Yeah.
maybe on paper, but they don't actually address the industry's real needs. Like those high-cost practical barriers we talked about earlier, they end up solving theoretical problems, perhaps, while ignoring the really expensive, messy realities of drug development.
And what's really striking is that this isn't exactly new information, is it? It sounds like there was a chance to fix this maybe a decade ago.
There really was. Back in 2012, right after KDDF got going in Korea, Japan's cabinet office actually did a survey. They looked into similar strategic integrated approaches.
So they knew about this model early on.
They studied it. But the report that came out of that survey, it was basically shelved, ignored. Some sources involved said the findings often weren't even properly circulated or read by the people who needed to see them.
Wow.
So it wasn't just a waste of money doing the survey, the huge missed opportunity. A failure of institutional learning, really. Japan seemed to focus only on benchmarking against the U.S. model and kind of missed what was happening strategically right next door with South Korea and China.
The cost of that failure seems immense. Not just money, but time, talent, competitiveness.
It's foundational, really. It underlines that, real innovation needs systems designed based on what's actually happening on the ground, not just assumptions made in meeting rooms. The difference between South Korea's trajectory and Japan's relative stagnation seems to be that willingness to let practical, industry expert-driven policy take the lead.
So let's bring this home. What does this South Korean blueprint mean for you, the listener? Especially if you're involved in trying to speed up innovation in any complex, expensive field.
Well, the South Korean model offers a pretty clear playbook, I think. Success seems built on having those clear, measurable, time-bound goals, like their 2030 vision. Plus, high operational transparency, institutional support that tackles practical needs like the free testing access, and just this relentless focus on building global competence, both in language and in sales.
The takeaway seems to be that strategically cultivating an industry with clear targets and real accountability just works better than sort of vaguely supporting it with money. Policy only works if it solves the real problems practitioners face.
Couldn't agree more. The most critical step seems to be moving from just providing capital to strategically deploying it, and crucially, making sure the people actually doing the work have a real voice in designing the systems meant to help them.
Right. And that leads us to our final thought for you to consider. If a nation sets really clear, measurable, time-bound goals for an industry like South Korea's detailed 2030 vision, how much of the success that follows is actually down to the money itself? And how much is maybe just due to aligning everyone's energy, setting that standard of transparency that forces accountability? From the startup researcher right up to the top government official, something to think about. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.